Today we're going to be continuing episode 3 of the Psychomagnetic Self-Talk series, and this is designed to really help you shift what you're emotionally attracted to and repelled by so that you can then shift the kinds of results that you attract or repel through your actions, right? So it's figuring out how can we move our emotions around intentionally by the way that we interact with ourselves. And if we can do that, well, then we can probably get some good stuff happening in our life, take some good action and that sort of thing. And in this episode, I don't know if we call it episode, call it an entry, call it, whatever. We're going to be talking about the idea of resonance. And resonance, I think, is super important to understand anytime you're dealing with any sort of internal work, because if you don't get this concept, then you're going to be really hamstringing your efforts in a significant way. You can think of resonance as just a form of alignment or misalignment. Okay, it's kind of like the greater resonance that you are experiencing, the more flow, ease, and power that you feel. So you can think of like flow states as states of resonance, right? And there's different kinds of resonance. So we've got mental resonance, and that would be like when you feel like, oh, something is true. It sounds true, right? That there's like a click there, right? There's emotional resonance where you feel something, it's like, oh, I want this thing, or I feel that opinion, or I feel that desire, or whatever, okay? So you're running on the emotional level. Physical resonance is when you're just kind of doing something, right? So, I'm in the physical resonance of sitting in a chair right now looking into a camera, all right? And then I would say there's even like a deeper form of resonance, almost like a essential resonance or spiritual resonance that's different a little bit. Maybe even you call it intuitive resonance. It's different than like emotional, but it's kind of like that. So for example, like if you have a craving for something that is not really authentic, like maybe you got a craving for, watching porn or, eating some, a bunch of junk food, like you might be emotionally resonant with that idea. But then if you really kind of tuned into yourself, it's like, is that really what you want? And then there'd be a part that's like, no. And so that's like the deeper sort of, I think of it as spiritual resonance, but maybe you can think of it as intuitive resonance as well, or essential resonance. And then obviously we got the circumstantial stuff. So it's like, how you are interfacing with your reality around you. The opposite of resonance is dissonance, okay, when you're at odds with things. And so I want to walk through just a couple examples here to help you get where I'm going with this. So we just talked about circumstantial resonance. So a state of circumstantial dissonance would be where mentally, emotionally, physically, you're aligned, but your environment is blocking you. So for example, maybe you're ready to take off on building your side business, but your wife just had a baby and you need to help take care of her and the baby. So like, on one level, you're totally ready to kick ass on your side business, but circumstances are just not so to support you in that. So you'd be dissonant in that regard. Now, one of the most common kinds of dissonance that we run into is when we start, when we rationally click with something and maybe we physically understand what we're supposed to do and want to do it, but like emotionally something's off. So that's what happens when someone's engaging in white knuckling or they're forcing things, okay? So for example, like say you got to do some work or you have a project, all right? Emotionally, it's like doing that project's the last thing that you want to do. It's like emotionally, you just want to, watch TV and have fun and do anything else other than work on your project. But rationally, you have to, and physically you're quite capable of doing it. And so it's like you have to force through, right? You have to, anytime there's dissonance that you experience, particularly, on the emotional level, like you're going to have to just kind of force through it unless you can shift something on that emotional level, right? And so this is where self-talk comes in. Self-talk gives us a tool set to shift how we resonate with things, okay? And what I see a lot of is guys engaging in self-talk in a dissonant manner, in a way that causes them to clash with themselves, and they don't really get very far with their self-talk. So this would be someone who just tries to bully themselves. Right? Okay. They just maybe they're just like, you better do this thing or else you suck. Right? We talk about this in my Omni Game series. This is a vacuous sort of intention and motivation and whatnot. Right? And so that's can be very dissonant. It's just kind of about squashing the emotion. Okay. Another way would be someone who just is very mechanical with it. And it's okay to be a little mechanical in the beginning. Maybe you're just trying to try it out and whatever. But some people, they just repeat affirmations, or they just say like one little script over and over again to themselves, and they think that that's going to impact their emotionality, and it's not really. You know, maybe once in a while it'll help, but like it's not really connected. It's just kind of firing off, right? So you want to always think about your relationship with yourself in the same way that you think about your relationship with other people, okay? Like if we were going to have a conversation and I just, railroaded you in the conversation, I just kind of talked over you, I just ignored what you said and just like talked about whatever I wanted to talk about, you wouldn't really enjoy the conversation very much. In fact, you would probably start tuning out, and, if it kept up, you'd probably want to avoid interacting with me, period, right? You want to be talking to yourself in the same way as if you were trying to have a productive conversation with other people. And this is where the main point of this video comes in, which is the idea of centered self-talk. So what does that mean? What does that mean? So when we're doing centered self-talk, what we're trying to do is establish a core bit of resonance, like some common ground between the different aspects of our psyche and circumstances, so that we all have a starting point. All our parts have like one point from where they're starting on the same page, and then we can then move from there. So if we're going to do the analog between me talking with someone else, it's similar to the idea of pacing and leading, which is a conversational tactic, or mirroring, if you've heard of that before. It's the idea that, like, all right, say someone comes to me and they're upset. Before I just give them advice, like if I just say, like if I just write them up, be like, don't be upset, do this instead, or, like, that's silly for you to be upset. You should, approach it from this perspective. Like that's going to kind of shut them down. That's going to immediately create some sort of disconnect between them, or between us, and I'm not going to be able to help them as much. Back before I got trained as a coach, this is what I would do when I would try and like help people or whatever, is I would just, basically shut them down, override them, that sort of thing. But what I learned is that you have to create some kind of shared energetic space. And one of the easiest ways to do that is through acknowledging and validating where someone's at. So it's like, say someone comes to me and they're upset. I say, hey, why are you upset? And I try to understand it. And then I say, from that perspective, I totally get where you're coming from. I would be upset, if I was looking at it that way too. Or, like I'm not saying that they're right necessarily, but I'm saying that I understand. I'm giving them permission to be where they're at and letting them know that I'm kind of there with them. And if I can mirror their concern, that creates it even more. So it's like if I get a little upset with them, like, oh yeah, that dude was a jerk to you. I can't believe he did that. And if they're upset and I get a little upset like for them, all of a sudden we're sharing an energetic rapport. We're on the same page. Once we get that sort of connection established, it's so much easier to shift the person, right? I can be like, oh yeah, he's such a jerk, but sometimes people just have bad days and they say dumb things, right? If I led with that, the chances of it hitting and landing and helping, very low. But if I establish connection first and then say, sometimes maybe he's just having a bad day sort of thing, they're much more likely to hear it, and it's much more likely to actually impact how they feel. And so the same principle holds true when you're trying to talk to yourself. You have to really connect with where you're at in the moment if you want to be able to start shifting yourself. And I think a lot of people struggle with this. A lot of people have layers of what I would call meta emotions, which would be emotions about their emotions. So for example, one place I used to struggle with that is when it comes to sitting down and doing my work, I would feel resistance, right? And then a part of me who felt resistance to sitting down and doing my creative work would get pissed and be like, hey, don't you feel resistant? This is your job. You're supposed to love this stuff. You're such an idiot for not wanting to do it. And then as soon as I did that, the rapport with myself would break. And then my only option was either just give up on trying to be productive or just brute force my way through. A much better approach is to actually connect with that part and be like, hey, all right, man, I hear you. You don't really feel like sitting down and doing this, but it's not that bad, right? Like, I know you'd be more comfortable to do whatever. I know you're a little bit worried that maybe the content's not going to go smoothly. You don't really have a super good idea yet, but guess what? We're going to figure this out. We're just going to chill out, put some good lo-fi music on, and we're just going to get ourselves into a groove. We're going to start asking ourselves some questions, and then we're going to find something, and it's going to be fine. Doing it like that, like starting with the acknowledgement of where I was at and accepting that lets everything afterward be much, much more powerful. This is a concept that's very, popular in different kinds of meditation teachings and stuff like that. I think it's like an old Buddhist sort of idea. It's like, invite all the emotions in as if they were, honored guests, give them a seat at the table. And this is something that you have to do whenever you're feeling chaotic. If you want to start getting controlled, it's like bring everybody to the table and give them a space. And this takes energy. This isn't something that's necessarily easy. It can be taxing, because in a lot of ways what you're doing is you're pulling all your strands of energy that are going down autopilot pathways, and you're sucking it all into your center. You're bringing it all into your consciousness, and you're letting it all bounce around in there. And a lot of that tends to be emotional. And then it's kind of like you bring everybody to the table. Everyone's kind of fighting and throwing food at each other and, threatening to leave. But your rational mind has to be the leader and be like, hey, guess what? We're going to hear from all of you. We're going to work through all of this, and we're going to figure out a good plan. Going at this self-talk from this perspective and acknowledging how you feel. And sometimes you got to list out all the things, right? Sometimes if I'm really, worked up, I'm going to have to write out each thread, each thought. And this is where journaling is really powerful. Write it all out and then kind of sort through it after the fact. Okay. And this is something that can take a little bit of work. And if you want a full structured sort of approach on how to handle this, then make sure you check out the free guides link in the description, and check out my Metascript method guide. That's where I show you my full structured journaling thing, which is really useful for this kind of stuff. And a lot of guys have used that very, very successfully. So check that out if you're interested in how to really, lay things out in a productive manner. The final piece to this centered self-talk is that you got to recognize that you got to match intensity. Okay. And this is really important for my guys who are doing kind of essentially addiction work, or, really working with really bad habits and strong cravings and that kind of stuff, is that in order to really match, to build the rapport with really strong emotions, you got to be showing up in a very strong manner. Okay. For example, if I'm going to really be present with someone who's in the middle of a crisis, I'm going to have to get potentially fairly intense with them. All right. So for example, if, a loved one of mine, they're quitting drugs and they're about to relapse and they're reaching for the needle and they're going for it, I got to be willing to tackle them. Right? It's if I'm with a friend and he's going crazy and he's going, 100 miles an hour about to go off a cliff, I got to be willing to grab him and pull both of us out of the moving car. Okay? That's the level of intensity you need to be able to bring at times, right? And once you do that, once you get the level of rapport, then usually the best effort's about calming things down. But you almost can't calm things down until you bring things up to match with yourself. And this is why I think a lot of people they really struggle with strong cravings, is because they're not willing to actually acknowledge the intensity of what they're experiencing or go there consciously. They're just I'm going to tune out. That's just too much for me. And then they just let autopilot take over, and then they just, they kind of give up on whatever their goals are, and they relapse or act out or whatever it is that they're trying to avoid. And so, you got to be willing to get intense with yourself at times. And then once you do that, then you can start leading yourself in a better direction with the way that you talk to yourself. So the big thing that I want you guys to be practicing between now and the next episode is this, right? Learning how to give your emotions space. Learn how to translate them, learn how to acknowledge them, learn how to validate them. Doesn't mean you're saying they're right. Okay. A lot of times your emotions are really dumb. Sometimes they're really wrong. But sometimes they also have very important stuff to say. So you have to treat them with respect. And then once you do that and you say, hey, I like tell yourself how you understand how you feel, be compassionate to yourself, and then try to lead yourself in a better direction. And let me know what happens. I'm interested to hear from you guys because there's a lot more to this. We're still just setting up the core structures and stuff, but eventually we're going to be getting into how exactly do you respond in the most powerful ways. But that's kind of all moot if you're not actually connecting with yourself in the first place. So that's what I have for you guys in this one. So if you enjoyed that topic, please make sure you feed the algorithm, like, subscribe, do all that kinds of good stuff.